Good evening. I hope you're well. And you're very welcome in Glasgow tonight when we are meeting during the period of COP26. We have with us some interesting people. Yes, well, we're going to decide that at the end of the evening. And we're going to talk about the church involvement in climate change. We'll have it is on Zoom and on YouTube, so please feel free to send any questions you may have to us in the chat box, and we will be communicating it to the speaker later on. And if people in the group here have any questions as well, we'll take them from the group. The first question is, I'm asking people at the panel, who are you? And why do you think you have been invited? Knowing that the question is, what does the Methodist Church do about climate change?
Well, good evening, folks. My name is Tim Baker. I'm the Church's manager at All We Can, which is the Methodist Church's international development agency. We've been working on behalf of the Methodist family for the last 80 years. Around the world, seeking to tackle poverty, and poverty is our main aim, the tackling of poverty around the world and the places most affected by poverty. And we do that through long-term partnerships. And I sometimes describe us as accidental climate change activists or campaigners, because what we've learned, realised and come to be aware of is just in the last decade, really, a huge intersection between what we're seeking to do, tackle poverty around the world, and the climate crisis, and the way the climate crisis is impacting the communities that we're trying to work with. It's a bit like trying to run up a ski slope, in that all the good work that some of our partners have been doing for many decades is now being challenged and affected by the climate crisis. So we're working in that space, and hopefully during the evening I'll share with you some stories about some of that work and how it's having an impact and how we're seeking to adapt to this changing world that we find ourselves in.
Thank you. I'm Steve Hucklesby. It's really good to be with you this evening. I'm the policy advisor on international affairs with Methodist Church in Britain. I work in the Joint Public Issues team. So the Joint Public Issues team joins up work of Methodist Church with Baptist Union and the United Reformed Church. What does it mean to be a policy officer in the Methodist Church? What it means is that I'm one of those people that help Methodists across the UK have conversations about some of the big issues of the day, like climate change. As a result of that, Methodist districts sometimes bring resolutions to the Methodist conference, and then that sets policy for the Methodist Church, and I help the Methodist Church to represent that policy within the church and also to the outside world.
Thanks, Steve. I'm Reverend Dr. Andrew Harper. I'm the head of ethics for the Central Finance Board of the Methodist Church. And I'm here because my main job is to ensure that Methodist money is used for good, seeking more moral returns, making sure that it's invested in places that line up with the ethics of the Methodist Church, and to speak on your behalf to companies, to government, to associations and organizations, to drive forward that change we would all like to see, to drive forward the policy that's coming out, taking it straight into the boardroom, so there's a Methodist voice out there in industry.
So the first question is a question of the evening. What does the Methodist Church do about climate change?
Well, I might start with something we did recently at the CFB in response to what conference was telling us. You might have noticed over the summer, the CFB disinvested totally from oil and gas. We sold our last two holdings, that's Royal Dutch Shell and Equinor. And now across all of our funds, we are out of oil and gas. And we see disinvestment as a really powerful tool, but that should be used sparingly. You know, many would say to us, why didn't you keep a seat at the table? Disinvestment means you no longer have a holding in that company. You can no longer vote at their AGMs. You have less access to their investment relations personnel. You have less input and voice directly into the company. So it must be used sparingly. And on the whole, I would agree with these people that disinvestment should be the very last option. It becomes the very last option, really, after periods of lackluster engagement, when companies just aren't responding to our needs as the Methodist Church, the needs of the poor, the needs of the marginalized, when they're just not responding, when they're not committed to pace of change, when they show no intention of making any steps forward to address this climate emergency, that's when we say, this party is not for us, we're leaving. That can be a powerful voice. It also gives us a bit of integrity. We can't come to you and say that by holding Shell and Equinor at this time, when they're not committed to what was agreed at Paris, at this time, we can't with integrity tell you that's a moral return. So sure, disinvestment, it shouldn't be a regularly used tool. But when it is used in the right situation, it's powerful. And we've got media attention around this. And we've separated ourselves as the Methodist Church away from the pack of our peers. We don't hold oil and gas in our portfolio. Methodist funds are not tainted in that way. And that's something we can be proud of. And it's something we can continue to encourage the oil and gas companies to commit seriously to pace of change, to the Paris targets, to the targets that will hopefully be agreed here at Glasgow. And until then, until they seriously commit, the conference has told us it's not for us. Steve, I don't know if you want to speak a little bit about conference and how that conversation built up and led us to this investment decision.
Sure, because this is a movement that has been requested by members of the Methodist Church, and the Methodist Church has quite democratic structures that allows those messages to get through to our governing body. So what we've seen over the last few years, the Central Finance Board of the Methodist Church disinvested from coal, and then it began progressively to disinvestment from oil and gas. But members of the Methodist Church were coming to conference saying that that wasn't going fast enough. They were looking for faster action, and the CFB has responded to that. So why are Methodist members concerned about this issue? Well, first of all, because we do see the climate crisis that we have at the moment as a human failure. I think in Christian terms, we might even call it sin. Because what we've done is we've created an injustice in the world, an injustice towards developing countries and people in areas of the world which are particularly vulnerable to climate crisis, and an injustice towards future generations. So where do oil companies come into this? There is a movement across the world which Methodist members have noticed and are now a part of. And they see the oil companies as being part of the injustice, not, of course, because they're producing oil and gas, which we're all using today, but I think because of the oil companies' vision of the future. This is where we part company with them. This is where we have some difficulties. And what we're, I think, asking for from oil companies essentially is a greater sense of honesty in the debate. Oil companies' vision of the future has been predicated on a set of metrics produced by the International Energy Agency that are optimistic in the extreme. So they incorporate a lot of CCS, carbon capture and storage, which will be highly unlikely, I think, to to actually come through in practice. And yet at the same time, the oil companies have immense power, financial power and influence as well. And that just hasn't sat very easily with many Methodist members.
Thank you both. And I think just to kind of add a final point, I think there's something really powerful about us saying as Methodists, not in our name. Actually, I used the analogy of running up a scree slope in my introduction, and I think we've said, whilst some of the oil and gas companies have these current positions on the way they are using the climate, the Earth's resources, and influencing the changing temperatures and weather patterns around the globe, whilst that's still the case, not in our name. And I think that's a really powerful statement for us to make as Christians. Thanks, Andrew, for your, I love that, a powerful tool as an image for what disinvestment might be. And it certainly has been an enabling force for us as the part of the Methodist family that's talking about climate justice's impact on local communities, to say, and that family, our whole family, is saying, not in our name. So credit to all involved in that piece of work, I think.
Well, thank you very much for your answers. I think that explains a lot, because I think we hear the question of the investment and we don't necessarily know exactly what it means, many of us. Is that the only thing we can do as a church? Or the question will be, what's next?
I think there's a tremendous amount that we can do and that we are already doing throughout the Methodist Church. Woodlands Methodist Church, where we're meeting tonight, is an eco-congregation. Eco-congregation is a movement that is sweeping, I think, churches in the UK at the moment. The 4,000th eco church was a Methodist church, in fact, quite recently. An eco-congregation gives credit to the congregations of churches for what they are already doing, and what typically they are doing if they are an eco-congregation is they're connecting their faith, their theology, their prayer, their worship, and their ethics with their actions as a local church community. And there are some big challenges ahead, but that's the start, that's the basis of what we are seeking to do as local communities of faith.
I think what we're really clear about is, at the CFB, we need to see the mission of the whole church as our mission as well. And so to do that, we're really going to make the Methodist money work harder, squeezing every little pint of effort we can get out of that, to speak on behalf of the issues that are so important to this congregation here in Glasgow and to many congregations and Methodist people around the globe. We're also going to speak on behalf of the poor and the marginalized, those people who might be left behind in this transition to a more sustainable future. Those people, particularly in the global south, who Tim interacts with, who rely on fossil fuel industry to survive. I'm thinking in particular the many Nigerian Methodist workers who rely on the oil and gas industry to survive. The miners in Zimbabwe, in Botswana, in South Africa. We need to be mindful that in an effort to justly transition us to a more sustainable future, we don't create a whole new type of climate refugees. Those type of refugees whose greatest concerns at this moment are not climate change, but climate change policy. That their livelihoods could be written out of existence with a stroke of a pen. We need to care about those people just as much as we care about the people right now who are suffering the very real effects of the climate emergency. So we'll be speaking to that. We'll be listening to the collective voices of the church much more deeply. And we're going to start shifting our narrative. You know, we're never going to invest in gambling, in tobacco, in alcohol. That's never going to be part of the CFB portfolio. So instead of only being concerned about what we don't own, we're going to be much more deeply concerned about what we do own. And I think that's really important. Building a portfolio that we can be proud of. And you know, sometimes that means we might have to sit with the tax collector. That might mean sometimes our portfolio has some unsavories in it. We're going to have to get our hands dirty as a church. You know, we have two options here, really. Create a completely clean portfolio that forgets about really the poor and the marginalized and just focuses on not investing in things that make us uncomfortable. Or we can get our hands dirty, as Jesus did, working with companies, being more concerned about how we own it rather than what we own. So we're going to be exploring some of those possibilities with the whole church, taking in some consultations from various groups. And we've already begun a little bit of this project. And we work closely with JPIT to help us guide us through that, to really hear the voice of the church and to give us an insight on that direction of travel the church might be heading.
I think one of the things that has struck me as I've been working with the Central Finance Board is the global reach that work has. Epworth Investment Central Finance Board is what, 1.2 billion?
Yeah,
1.3,
1.3, 1.4.
Okay.
Depending on who you ask and what day it is.
That's not a small amount of money.
No.
It's not huge in the grand scheme of things in investment, but the Central Finance Board and Epworth Investments seek to be a thought leader in the area of investment management and within the investment management industry. And a lot of those investments are made in quite large companies, either in the UK market or in the European or global markets, many of them household names, but most of them that have a global reach themselves. So if we can have a voice within that sphere, okay, it may not be a loud voice, but it is a voice. If we can have a voice in that sphere, we can, it's a different way in which we can reach out across the borders of the UK and to some of the structures in other parts of the world. And I think I'd love us to have some more conversations with our partners in the South about some of the investment work we do in the UK. Tim, you might want to.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I love this kind of taking it down an angle of global reach. I think that's really helpful. That's the place we have to be at in order to bring about real change. It's what we really hope for the folks down the road having their conversations right now, isn't it? At COP26, is that they can grasp the global context of this conversation about climate change. And I think, well, the kind of idea of change is really important to me and to our work at All We Can as well. And a lot of what we're doing around the world is helping some of those poor and marginalized communities that you mentioned, Andrew, helping them to adapt to the impacts of the climate crisis right now. And that's about much more than just what are we planning for the future and how, and all of that's really important on how we tackle the long-term impacts of climate change when we start to reduce the the amount of carbon going into the atmosphere, but also climate change is happening right now. It often worries me that when I start talking about climate change with folks, they start talking about their grandkids or their great-grandkids, as if this is a sort of delayed problem that isn't affecting our planet just yet, but we hope it won't. The All We Can experience and the communities we're working with right now is that that their reality is that it's happening to us right now, to our brothers and sisters around the world. If you hop on the All We Can website, you can hear some of those stories firsthand. People talking about the fact that in Malawi, up until less than 8 years ago, there's a whole area that we've been working with to help them with their agricultural projects, and our amazing talented local partner there has been supporting them in pioneering lots of different approaches to agriculture. And in their community, they used to have two rainy seasons. They used to have 2 rainy seasons and therefore 2 harvests a year. That's not just twice as many harvest festival services, it's also a lot more food to feed the local community. In the last 8 years, that's changed from 2 to 1. They now only have 1 rainy season, and it's a slightly more unreliable rainy season. It's more monsoon rains, it's more uncertain. And when you're living hand to mouth and what you grow on a little bit of land you happen to own isn't just a luxury, as it is for me when I stick a few spuds in the vegetable plot, it's actually what you need to live off. That's life-changing and crisis-causing, and that's why we've shifted this language from climate change to climate crisis, because it's happening now. It's not something we can sit and wait on. So I suppose add my thanks to those here at Woodlands and tuning in online who've supported All We Can over the years, because you're helping us to help some of those local communities to adapt and to continue to still be here in 10, 15, 20, 30 years time, when some of the impact of the really important disinvestment work we're doing and some of the impact of the anti-climate change measures that we're taking now might start to take effect. So yeah, just encouraging us to remember our global reach and the impacts that each of us have and can have globally as well.
Well, thank you very much. I can hear that the church is doing a lot of things which are quite reactive, and just because we are talking, I like this expression of the global reach, starting to take its rich money out of some of the ports. But is there any action which are active to try to put the money or action in areas which are going to make a difference positively? Because I have the feeling it's very much reactive. Is there anything going positive? Early on, we are starting talking about money, so disinvestment, yes, but what about investment?
I think importantly, engagement is where we are active. And engagement means us talking to companies, pressuring companies, whether that's in a meeting with them or in a public sense, in a publication or an interview. That means voting at their AGMs. That means us being active owners of those funds. Not just letting them sit there, not just letting our ownership of their shares sit there and do nothing, but instead using that ownership as an extension of the church's mission. So that in fact, this prophetic voice that the Methodist Church is speaking right now. You know, I watched the Regenerate, the Methodist Youth Conference. I followed a bit of that online. And here we've got some of the Methodist COP26 representatives. We're all young people. You know, this generation is disproportionately concerned with the issues of the climate emergency, with the issues of justice. There's a prophetic voice burning inside of the Methodist Church. And so for us as investors, we can't dampen that. We need to take the energy that's born out of that prophetic voice and speak into the boardroom on behalf of the poor, on behalf of the marginalized, on behalf of the people that prophetic voice is seeking to speak on behalf of. And when we do that, that active ownership becomes a form of mission. It's an extension of the church's ministry. And I think with the CFB, we're not just doing this for a tick-bucking box exercise. We really believe this stuff with deep passion and conviction. We really believe that, and we want to increasingly play a part in fulfilling Christ's mission through his church. And we feel that the Methodist Church, with that prophetic voice that it's been speaking since slavery in the US, since apartheid in South Africa, and now with the climate emergency, that prophetic voice is powerful and gives us a unique perspective. We want to speak on your behalf, right in the boardroom, and that's what we'll do.
I think I'll take the investment question in a slightly different way. First of all, to say that it's some of the young people in the church who have been urging the church to act on investment and disinvestment. And that is because investment is about the future, and young people are particularly keenly interested and have a direct interest in the future. But for the Methodist Church over the coming years, I think there are going to be quite some significant challenges for us. We're talking about becoming a net zero church by 2030. We know that's what we need to do. We know that's compatible with addressing the climate crisis. And yet that's going to concern us with the way in which we use our money and resources within the Methodist Church. So one of the biggest areas of our carbon footprint is going to be our buildings. So that is going to have some questions for us as to how we invest in our buildings, and the way in which we make decisions about our reserves and our monies. So we need to reduce the carbon footprints of our buildings. We've got some buildings which that's going to be very difficult. We've got poor insulation in the buildings. We've got poor use of energy which is devoted to fossil fuels. We need to invest in renewable forms of energy. We need to invest in green electricity tariffs. Some of these things cost money. Some of them actually save money. People think that investment in green technologies is always a cost. It's not. Sometimes it's a saving as well. But if you're looking at it, converting a building so that you're using air source heat pumps and dealing with the insulation of the walls and that sort of thing, sometimes it costs a lot of money. And that's going to have implications for some churches as to whether in fact it's worth investing in the building. To what extent is the building now crucial to being a worshipping community in the 21st century, post-COVID, post-lockdown? All of these questions, we don't quite know how they're going to pan out, but they need to be addressed rather rapidly now if we're talking about net zero by 2030.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. In my own church in South Leeds, we've just sold our building and we're exploring life as a church without a building to be in. And I think there's some interesting stuff. I know there's a church in this circuit too on that same journey of what does it look like to be a worshipping community, a community invested in our local area, a community of people seeking justice and seeking to spread the gospel, but without a building. And that's not true. That's not right for all of us, but perhaps it's right for more of us that are currently on that journey, and I love that. And I think what really struck me as you were talking there, Steve, was the way that lots of us love our church buildings, don't we? It was quite painful for many of us to sit around that church council and decide to sell up, because my daughter was baptized there, and so-and-so got married there, and somebody's mum had their funeral there, and that really matters to people. But I suppose what I guess I'm interested in is, does it matter more to us than our relationship with the planet we live on? Probably Methodist Chapel doesn't matter as much to me as the North Wales coastline, or parts of the Lake District, or the Holy Island of Lindisfarne, all of which are endangered by the climate crisis, but so too are our brothers and sisters in Bangladesh, and in many parts of the world where all we can at work. And so I think one of the things we've been sort of thinking about in this last year or so, and inviting people to be part of, is a relationship, a kind of partnership with the earth. Any of you who've heard me talk about All We Can for any length of time will have no doubt have heard me use the word partnership. It's our kind of raison d'etre. It's what we do around the world, is work alongside our local partners, and in many ways enable them to do the work for us. They are the implementing agents. They're the ones who come up with the ideas. You know, I can tell you about solar powered irrigation in Malawi. I can tell you about bicycles as a main means of transport in Uganda. I could tell you about farming innovations in India and Zimbabwe, but none of those are our ideas. We didn't come up with them. They come from the local community, and they're a form of partnership. And what we invest in is those partnerships, those long-term relationships with people who then bring about the change. And I guess what I'm kind of interested in us exploring as a church is, what does our long-term relationship with the planet look like? What kind of investment are we putting into the environment? We have most churches have a finance and property committee where we talk about what money we're going to invest in our buildings, and then the great asset that we have here. But do we yet have a normalized structure where we talk about what we as a church community are going to invest in our relationship with the earth, and with her resources, and therefore with the people we share this planet with? So I guess, yeah, taking investment to a next level, beyond just what happens to our shares and what happens to our buildings, but actually just what are we investing our time in? What do we care about? And I hope we all care enough about the earth to want to invest in it.
Okay. Before I open to questions, is there anything you would like to add? Are you happy to take?
We're happy to take questions.
Questions? Okay.
We think.
Barbara, you wanted to ask question?
Yeah, I wanted to make a point to Stephen and then ask a question.
Sorry, I'm going to take the microphone to make sure everybody can hear it. I'll bring it to you.
I wanted to make a point to Stephen first and then a question to Andrew. Yes, Woodlands is an eco-church congregation. Strathclyde Circuit has a very active green team, and several of the churches within the Strathclyde Circuit are eco congregations, and we have one church that is very close to silver level. We're trying to become an eco circuit, and all that's stopping us is that Eco Congregation Scotland just don't know how to do it. Andrew. Yes, CFB have disinvested from coal, gas, oil, and they don't invest in things like alcohol, tobacco, gambling. But you bank with the HSBC. Could the Methodist Church, with its investment of 1.3 to 1.4 billion, use its influence to get HSBC to disinvest, because they and Barclays are the two banks that have the heaviest investments in the fossil fuel industries? Thank you.
Sure. Now you had a question. I'm going to take another question. I got you read as a package. That one's true.
I'd like to ask a question. Now, this land is shrinking, and people are on land, and it's unstable for people. Are you doing anything to move those people onto other land and stop deforestation and different things like that?
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
I will take another question, is that it?
Okay, well, we're on the questions. I was thinking about the idea of the Methodist Church wanting to be carbon neutral, or net zero by 2030, and the implication of selling buildings to do that. Is there not a risk that we're playing almost a game of hot potato with these buildings, where by selling on the buildings, we haven't actually made a net change to the emissions that we're experiencing in the world? We're simply just selling a really inefficient building to someone else, so now they are emitting more as their content. Or are we doing this? Is the implication that when we sell a building, we're selling it to someone who has more money than us, who can actually make a better use of that building as a more efficient system?
Thank you. I will come back for another row of questions after this more.
Thanks. So I'll address the HSBC question. We want, as much as you do, to have a banking relationship that we can be proud of. And we admit it's often hard to defend the action or inaction of HSBC. On behalf of the Methodist people, though, we're engaging with HSBC, pressuring them to better their practices, publicly calling them out when necessary. And our pledge is to continue to work hard on your behalf, on behalf of those who so faithfully gave in tithes, on behalf of the mission of the Methodist Church to help better the practices of HSBC and all banks for that matter. We're committed to working toward a relationship that we can be proud of. There's always going to be challenges with banks. We are committed to working harder and harder and improving their standards the best we can. So yes, Barbara, we will be speaking to them. We have been speaking to them. We'll continue to do that, louder and louder, as loud as it takes. But I'm also glad you brought up banking. We're in a collaborative partnership with the World Council of Churches and the United Nations. And this collaborative partnership is looking at the banking sector and how the UN might use its influence along with the World Council of Churches and its member churches to improve banking standards. And we're really proud to be involved in that project. And we've had the opportunity to speak to some of the high-level officials who are here at COP that are working on this from the UN's side. The UN is also doing something called Greening the Blue, and this is looking at reducing their own emissions in the UN. The problem we have, though, with this relationship is that the UN's banking partner is the dirtiest, arguably the dirtiest bank in the world. The UN is banking with JP Morgan. There was audible gasps in the room for those of you who... And that's not good enough. That's not good enough when they're just across the road, calling on companies, calling on governments to improve their standards, when they are willingly, they're not forced to be in a relationship, as far as I know, to be in a relationship with JP Morgan. They're willingly involved in a relationship with JP Morgan. That's not good enough. So what are we doing, Barbara? We're talking to them. We're challenging them. We'll be speaking up publicly against them tomorrow. challenging the UN itself to commit to its own commitments. I mean, what a bizarre thing that we have to do as the Central Finance Board of the Methodist Church, to try to convince the UN to commit to the UN's own commitments. It's bonkers. But it's not good enough. That's the kind of prophetic courage that we're seeking at the CFB.
On HSBC, we're delighted in the Methodist Church that CFB is engaging and engaging on our behalf. I'll pick up on the question, Barbara, regarding eco-congregation. And it's brilliant that churches in the circuit here are working together to become eco-congregations. And if you have the majority of eco-congregations in the Strathclyde circuit, then I would consider that an eco-circuit. Eco-congregation in Scotland is managed a little differently from eco-church in England and Wales, and so I'm not going to speak for the eco-congregation in Scotland. But yeah, if your communities of faith in a local relationship with each other, then it just makes obvious sense that you should share your thoughts and your actions and your resources together to address the crisis that we face. On deforestation, yeah, the government has just made and big announcements on deforestation, which at COP26, and a majority of world's countries have signed up to a deforestation agreement that seeks to stop deforestation by 2030. Now, I feel that's a little bit late. Others may feel that's a bit late. But it's crucially important that we do preserve the major forests of our world. Two questions immediately spring to mind. One, countries have sought to pledge to stop deforestation in the past and have not managed it thus far. This we hope may be different this time around, because some of the countries with the major forests in the world, Indonesia, Brazil, Russia, others are on board. That's really positive. But could there be creative accounting that allows the logging and the economic exploitation to continue? We need really, really robust mechanisms. We need people around the world speaking out on this. The second question that comes to mind is regarding the ownership and management of those forests, which in many cases traditionally have been the resource of local indigenous communities. Are these millions or billions of pounds that are going into supporting the preservation of our forests, are they going to give back control to indigenous communities? Are they then going to become a community resource once again? One of the things that's quite obvious from COP26, and I've been in the blue zone, the government zone today, and the very obvious presence, I'm pleased to say, of members of indigenous communities from around the world looking to reassert their rights and their presence, and doing that in a global conference. That's heartening. That's encouraging to me. I really worry as to whether that message is going to get through to governments, and whether commitments on deforestation are going to hand back control.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. This reminds me of the power that we all do have, and most of us in this room have the ability to contact our MP or whoever else to keep reminding them of the things that that we as a country and as a global community have signed up to here at COP, and hopefully we'll find lots more of those before next week is out. The piece on eco-church is really great. Thanks, Barbara. We've been happily plugging that for a long time. Those of you who are here in this room might be able to have a chance to pick up our devotional, which is on the table at the back. Those of you online can find it online. on our website. It's a whole series of reflections from people across the church who found ways to engage with this climate story and the climate crisis. We've called it radically changing the story, because there's this understanding that it has to change quite dramatically. But I think eco-church is a really, really important part of that puzzle. We've been really happy to support what Harper have done in England and what eco-congregations here in Scotland is trying to do. I realise they haven't quite got their head around the Methodist circuit yet. Harper have had to go kind of out of their way, I think, to create a circuit and a district award in south of the border, and we applaud them for that. And yeah, just massively encourage you wherever if you're not part of, if you've not come across it before, do look it up. James, to your question about are we just selling on our emissions? I think it's a really, really important one, and it's an important one at lots of levels actually. You know, are we here in the UK also as guilty of flogging our emissions to other parts of the world and then trying to look pretty? Probably, and certainly as a church, that's something we've got to be really careful of. I think the Methodist Church is quite good and quite cautious about how we sell our buildings. Perhaps a few times over the years I've said too cautious, and we make it quite difficult to sell our buildings. And part of what needs to go into that work, I think, needs to be making sure we're selling it so that we're not also just passing on emissions to other people. In the case of our own building in South Leeds, it's going to become a block of flats and be totally retrofitted by somebody who can afford to retrofit it, which I think you began to hint at in the question. And so hopefully we're not doing that. But yeah, thank you. Good invitation to keep thinking radically.
Thank you, Tim. I think, Andrew, you have a question to ask. So, because I don't understand the question you have sent me, I'm going to ask you to ask a question. Sorry, should I come back to you if you want?
My question is really something, just to poke it, to go a little bit deeper. You talked a lot about what we should do and what we are doing, but we are also church, and in some ways, God is part of this story. Have we got a theology of a green God with whom we are in partnership in this thing? Because, you know, in my mind, sometimes we've got to be careful. We can't save the planet, just as we can't save ourselves. We've shown that throughout human history. Where's the God talk in all this?
I suspect you're not talking about ET or anybody coming from Mars, aren't you? When you're talking about the green God. Is there anybody who would like to ask a question? Fiona, sorry, you asked. Sorry.
Talking about deforestation, but what about replacing the trees to letting the lungs of the world breathe?
Thank you, Fiona. So first, the green God. Well, you have the green God. Well done.
Happily, I'm not a god of any kind. Yes, of course, God is central, and the Methodist Church has been concerned with the climate crisis from a perspective of God's creation for a very long time. I mean, going back to 2000, for example, when statements were coming from circuits and districts to conference on this. In 2011, the Methodist Church produced Hope of God's Future, which is a statement of Methodist conference on theology around climate change. Statement of conference means that it is an important piece of theology for the Methodist Church, which the conference feels would stand for some time. So Hope in God's Future talks about the relationship of God with creation. We tend to divorce creation from the creator, which doesn't make sense. Do we have a green God? Well, I would say obviously we do, because God is, we understand God as the creator. And that Bible speaks of that relationship between God and his creation and his people many, many times. One of my favorite passages is around Psalm 104, which is a whole testament to God's creation and how the creation looks to God for sustenance. So it says, for example, that the lions prowl at the night and look for their food, and then the sun comes up, the lions go back to their lair, and then people come out and they go about their daily work. And there is this parallel between lions and people and other parts of God's creation, all dependent, all looking to God for their sustenance. This is a message, I think, which we as Christians, and which I find with other faiths as well, a perspective we share with other faiths, and something which we can bring to our societies to try to get that sense of a balance back again. We are out of balance in our systems at the moment. The world's pursuit of economic growth has placed us out of kilter with the ecosystems which we all depend on. And we need a radical change of mindset, which I believe people of faith can make the contribution with.
Yeah, just quickly, even at the CFB, down in the City of London, we're doing some deep theology. It may surprise you, yeah. But we are. We're drawing on the rich theological heritage of the Methodist Church to help guide us. And we'll be establishing a set of what we're calling ethical pillars. And these pillars are deeply rooted in theology. And these pillars will help guide us to ensure the things that we're doing, the actions of investment, the actions of engagement, to help better ensure what we're doing means we're caring about people, planet, and all of creation. So theology, even at the CFB, is the very start of everything. And it's our very understanding, as Steve said, of God as creator that guides everything we do at the CFB.
I was thinking maybe there's a series of t-shirts there, like theology, even at CFB. It's funny you mentioned Psalms as well, Steve, because when the question was being asked, a psalm came to my head as well, a line from Psalm 27, I think it is. I remain confident of this, that I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. And I think that's a verse we come back to often at All We Can, this kind of concept that our work is about here and now, and the psalmist captures that in that verse. And I think the very ministry and incarnation of Jesus captures that too, that our work as Christians is in the here and now. We have to be careful, I think, of a theology that lets us be lazy about how we interact with our world, because we believe that there's something else going on somewhere else. Jesus seems very interested in the here and now, the Jesus that I see in the Gospels, and that psalm verse just seems to kind of capture it, that if we are, like the psalmist, confident of this, that we will see the goodness of God in the land of the living, then we need to protect the land of the living, and it's been placed in our care, and we need to do our very best for it. Good theology question.
Yeah. I'm going to do something that you probably shouldn't do, but I'm going to challenge our dear superintendent minister here.
To an arm wrestle?
Not to an arm wrestle, but to say, have hope that although we can't save ourselves, the Methodist people can save the planet. We've seen how one girl can change the narrative around climate. We've seen how one man can captivate the world and change the narrative around apartheid. We've seen how individuals can make huge impacts I look around the country, I look around the Methodist people who are deeply passionate about these things, and I pray that we find our voice. And I bet that there's one of us in this group of people called Methodists that can find that voice and change the narrative. So we should have hope.
I agree, and I'd just like to pick up on an aspect of that because related to COP26 taking place at the moment. We've talked a lot this evening about the actions that we can do as individuals, as church communities, as church investors, as churches relating with others in other parts of the world. But at the end of the day, we need our governments to act. Now, walking into the Blue Zone, the SEC Centre in Glasgow, you've got a lot of people shouting outside. What they're doing, those people in there, what they're doing, they'll make no difference. And there's this fatalistic attitude towards the agreements of governments. Unfortunately, we need them on our side. It's absolutely crucial. We need government policies across the world in order to put in place the economic structures that make the actions that we do as individuals make them count and amplify them across the land without the right economic structures in place. We're not going to address climate change nearly fast enough, and we're also not going to be able to pursue the actions that we need to take as individuals. So as a church community, you're looking at your heating, you need the technologies to be available, you need the power system in the UK to be switched towards renewables in order that we can make a difference in our own lives. We are plugged in to a society, and the societies need to change, and we're a part of that, as you say, Andrew, as individuals calling for that change. But that change is crucial. Let's not shrug our shoulders and think governments don't matter. It's absolutely crucial that we raise our voices with our governments to get the change that we need.
Thank you, Fiona. I'm aware we didn't really come to your question. The question was asked of 3 Methodists about theology, and we lost 25 minutes. But that's encouraging. The issue of kind of replanting and letting the earth's lungs grow. I think there's loads of really interesting stuff here. There's probably a whole hour we could do on the complicated relationship with carbon offsetting or attempting to replant forests. Some of our partners, or we count partners, part of the Methodist family, are doing tree planting. They're trying to do it in a sustainable way, particularly in Ethiopia. There's some tree planting going on to enable, particularly to help tackle soil degradation, which is one of the real impacts of climate change, is the way that soils become unusable for farming. And so one of our partners in Ethiopia, Adeno, do some brilliant work planting trees to enable soils to hold together and to be still usable for farming. But carbon offsetting more generally, I have a very complicated relationship with. I think there's a sort of laziness to the theology of it, certainly, to come back to that, to say, oh, I'll keep catching as many cheap flights as I want and just chuck a few quid towards a few charities and call that done. I can't see that being a sustainable future for our planet. And equally, Andrew and I were talking earlier, there's lots of unhealthy ways in which offsetting is being done. Even the carbon offsetting market has been hijacked by people wanting to make a fast dollar, and that can be particularly damaging. So yeah, thank you for the question. We need to plant more trees, but we need to do so carefully and in partnership and in relationship and in understanding the needs of the local people and the people where we're planting.
Well, thank you very much for answering all our questions. I'm sure there will be maybe more questions, so I'll be told to come more on that side. And I just want to say I'm delighted to see that the green gold is not the US dollar. Obviously, that is good progress.
Nor is it Steve.
And also that the three of you have used the term again and again, the word partners. Because I think that is one thing that within Methodism, we want to talk to people. We don't do things in isolation because we don't believe that we are the righteousness of the righteousness. But we are part of the community and we want to inspire other people. And I think that is something we want to cherish, isn't it? So thank you very much. We are going to have this little video. We're going to edit it and we're going to make sure more people have access to it. And just to remind everyone that tomorrow we will have discussions about climate change, or climate justice, or see already in trouble, climate justice and gender. That is tomorrow. So you're very welcome to join us.
That's Thursday. It's not a Scottish music.
Of course, it's Thursday. Tomorrow is big party, isn't it? It's a Scottish night. Kelly, Kelly, yes. Well, on Thursday we are having climate justice and gender. So you're all very, very welcome to join us on the channel or to come out to join us here. Have a lovely night and God bless you all. Thank you. Thank you.